One. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, you know what's funny? And I'm sure as debaters we're gonna get it. Common sense isn't that common. And sometimes improving the argument and adding all these reasons doesn't make people want to listen to you. Sometimes you have to shout, sometimes you have to scream, sometimes you have to cry. And in order to allow people en masse to have access to those ideas, you need to be able to appeal to emotion. The problem with putting a premium on logic is that it creates a utilitarian metric off which we see the world. Sure, in a vacuum, then only the strong should survive and resources should be distributed to those who have means, motivation, and capacity. But of course, as society developed and we became more humane, more rational, more civilized, we grew to realize that Black individuals and people of color weren't just the beasts of burden the white man once thought. Women were more capable than just being gatherers and belonging in the kitchen, and that they deserve jobs and enfranchisement too when we reject things like the gender pay gap. Or that queer and trans individuals have an equal place in the law, in economics, and in religion, contrary to what conservative incumbents might think when they want to be able to proselytize them or get them to convert when they say that there is something wrong with their brain, they're sick, and they're actually an attack against human society. A strategic observation I have for opening and top half is that they were correct. It's not about emotion or logic being good or bad, or one is better than the other, but we think that where this debate happens is about priority and extent of these particular things, and that being emotional and being logical is done on a case-to-case basis, and there are certain instances where it has to be proportional and skew to one over the other. Top half doesn't nuance this discussion enough to social justice discourse. They might say this semantically or categorically, but the path to victory of closing government is simple. We're gonna mech out the process and talk about how exactly you get change for social justice movements. I'm gonna answer 3 questions in my extension. Number 1, what are the unique harms of skewing to logic? And that is the consequence of the narrative when you put a premium on it. Number 2, why both of them are valid and there are certain instances where you have to skew or prioritize to one or the other depending on where you are in the movement. The metric I'm going to talk about here is how long the movement's been around and how mature it is in terms of traction and following. And number 3, where are we able to get galvanized change and what that exactly looks like. At best, opening government proves a sense of urgency and validation and says that from principle, yes, it should be equal. We agree with that, we're not going to knife them, but we think that more than just it being equal, there are instances in execution that it demands to be able to skew to one or the other. Meaning there are certain instances where you have to use a bit more logic and certain instances where you have to use emotion. And the part in which responds to opposition's case is the point in which you say that rationality and logic are automatically more valuable than emotion, undermines the ability of particular people to even be heard and actually get that emotion carried out. My layer of analysis here is simple. We have to take a look at it like a spectrum. On one hand, you have new movements, things which have less of a following, things that have been around not as long as the others. These include, but are not limited to, more radical strands of feminism like lipstick feminism, people of religions who are saying that we need to have a more liberal interpretation of the church and all these things pro-Pope Francis, and maybe even things pushing for trans rights. On the other hand, you have more like OG, more kind of older mechanisms, things like civil rights movements for blacks and people of color, or even the gender pay gap for particular women. We think that uniquely, new movements, because they have less people and virality, just need more emotion in order to be able to allow people to know that it exists. The point in which you lose logic is the point in which they say, this movement pareho lang, it's just the same. All women in the feminist movement and all queers and trans want the same thing. And that's exactly where it undermines the intersectionality and complexity of these particular movements. The nuance to why you have to be able to shout louder and proclaim a difference is exactly the point in which you don't have media coverage yet to be able to understand what's happening, and you literally need to be able to create some sort of scandal and uproar for people to give a shit and actually listen to you. That is as opposed to maybe like older movements, things like rights for black individuals and women, which maybe need more logic at the point in which they're already pushing for things like executive, legislative, and judicial reform. Meaning, not all social movements are a monolith. Not all of them react in the same way. And that, I think, is the pitfall of opening, because they assume that it's like a hodgepodge. But there are certain nuances depending on what they need that actually needs emotion. Why is emotion the tipping point? And why does it have to be charged positively, meaning like hope and virtue, or even charged negatively when you say like F you to those particular people who say that a queer and trans individual need the same thing, or a conservative woman and a radical feminist, oh, they want it to be the same thing. That is the point in which you make a lot of these social justice issues super vague, and the point in which like you make these dangerous assumptions and think that they all react uniquely in a certain way. The reason why we need to particularly use emotion is that because on side opposition, and this is my response, a lot of the discourse they proclaim about are contingent on those who have the privilege, the money, the network, and the capacity to be a part of the discussion. But as I said in my pre-oration, the average person who is middle class or even urban poor might not be as smart as we privileged debaters. That is to say, we need to be able to appeal to emotion, appeal to the meme culture in order for the great change that they want to actually be catalyzed. Meaning, you need the emotion to serve as a catalyst for change in order to like not just validate them, as what opening talks about, but literally get them involved in the discussion. Meaning, in order for people to truly understand, they need to be able to see the pain, they need to be able to see the virality, and for all of these reasons, we are very proud to stand on side proposition.